What if I told you that God needs therapy? Yes, the Almighty, the Creator of the universe, the perfect, all-knowing being, could probably use a good session on a therapist's couch. Now, I know what you're thinking. Wait, what? How can God, who is supposedly perfect, need therapy? That's exactly the point. For centuries, we've been sold this idea of an all-powerful, flawless deity who knows exactly what's best for us, whose wisdom is beyond comprehension, and whose love is unconditionally perfect. But if you look a little closer, you might start to notice something a bit off, something that doesn't exactly scream perfect being. You see, we've been taught that God is this immovable, serene figure who rules the universe with absolute control. But take a moment to read the stories. The God that floods the earth because people can't behave, the God who turns cities to ash for minor offenses, the God who gets jealous if you so much as glance at another idol. Does this sound like a perfect being to you? It sounds more like a person in need of some serious emotional support. Think about it. Would you trust someone with unlimited power and wisdom who throws tantrums like a petulant child? Who needs constant validation and can't handle rejection? This is where things get really interesting. The more you dig into religious stories, the more you begin to realize that God might not be the epitome of perfection we've been led to believe. Instead, maybe he's just a guy with some serious issues. And here's the kicker. He's not just any guy, he's the guy who built the whole universe. So, when you think about it, maybe God doesn't need our worship as much as he needs a good therapist. Wouldn't that make a lot more sense? We've all heard the myths, haven't we? God is perfect, infallible, unchanging. He created the universe, he knows everything, and he's the source of all good. He's the King of Kings, the Alpha and the Omega, the one who sees and knows all. But then, when we start looking a little closer, we realize that these ideas, these beliefs, don't really hold up. They crumble under the weight of even the slightest scrutiny. Let's think about the typical imagery we've been handed. You've probably seen it, a serene, wise figure sitting on a throne, looking down at us with a kind of perfect, detached grace. But now, imagine for a second that this figure wasn't so perfect. What if that figure, instead of a calm monarch, was more like an emotionally unstable king who needed constant reassurance? That's where we begin to uncover the truth, and it's a bit unsettling. God, the all-powerful creator, might actually be more like that one friend or family member who constantly needs to be told they're great otherwise. They just lose it. They flip out. They throw tantrums. Take, for example, the idea that God is supposed to be omniscient. He knows everything, right? He knows our every thought, our every move, before we even make them. So why then does he get so upset when we mess up? Wouldn't an all-knowing, perfect being just, you know, accept that we're going to screw things up every now and then? Wouldn't it be more reasonable for a being who knows everything to anticipate human failure and have a bit of compassion? Instead, what do we get? A God who floods the earth because people eat a piece of fruit. He literally wipes out the whole planet because two people ate an apple. Let's think about that for a second. Imagine your friend told you, I'm going to give you one rule, don't touch this apple. Now, no one's perfect, right? What do? You look at the apple, you want the apple, and sooner or later, you eat the apple. And then, bam, your friend gets angry. So angry, in fact, that they decide to punish not only you, but every single person who comes after you. Your kids, their kids, the entire human race. You could say, wait a minute, that's a bit much, isn't it? Maybe just sit down and talk it through, have a conversation? But no, the punishment is extreme. Instead of calmly explaining the rules or even offering forgiveness, the consequence is catastrophic. And here's the kicker. God knew humans were going to screw up. That's part of the whole omnipotence thing, right? So why set us up for failure in the first place? Why not put the tree somewhere else? Or just not create it at all? What does it say about a perfect, all-knowing being that creates a scenario where failure is inevitable and then gets outraged when it happens. Sounds a little less like wisdom and a lot more like, well, a tantrum. A really big tantrum. Now, let's dive deeper into the contradiction here. We've been told that God is all-loving. Okay, great. A loving God, that's what we all want. But what kind of love is this? The kind of love that demands constant attention. The kind of love that throws the world into chaos when it doesn't get its way? Think about it. How many times do we hear that God is love, that He's the epitome of love? But the reality is, when people don't do exactly what He wants, the punishment isn't just a little talk or a stern warning. No, it's full-blown destruction. Take the flood, for instance, or the destruction of entire cities like Sodom and Gomorrah. This isn't love. This is what we call overreaction. You've probably known people in your life who are constantly demanding validation. They're the ones who fish for compliments, who need to hear that they're amazing, that they're important, and if they don't get it, watch out. They get offended, they get angry, they pull away. It's exhausting, right? It's draining to be around people who can't handle rejection, who are always fishing for compliments. It's emotionally taxing. Now, picture a being with unlimited power, someone who controls everything in the universe, acting the same way. Think about that. This isn't a being that sits in perfect contentment. This is a being who throws tantrums, demands constant adoration, and gets upset when things don't go as planned. This brings us to another issue, the need for constant praise. God, in most religions, is described as the Most High, the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords. But if God is truly perfect, if He's truly all-knowing and beyond human comprehension, why does He need our adoration so badly? Think about it. Every week, millions of people show up at temples, churches, mosques, and synagogues to sing songs and chant about how amazing God Island. And if they don't, well, they're in trouble. Missing a service, not praising loud enough, or failing to give proper worship is met with punishment. The demand for praise becomes central. It's not enough to just acknowledge God's greatness in your heart, you have to show it publicly, loudly. You've got to bow, kneel, chant, sing. You've got to prove your love. If you don't, there's hell to pay. Now, let's pause for a second and reflect on this. Picture a friend or partner who demands constant praise. Every time they do something, anything, they need to hear how amazing they are. And if you forget to tell them, they get upset. Wouldn't you start to feel like they were a little insecure? If you were to say, "Hey, you're great, but you don't need to hear it all the time," wouldn't they snap back with something like, "I just need to know you appreciate me"? It's a bit exhausting, right? But this is what we see in the behavior attributed to God. He doesn't just want recognition, He needs it, He demands it. The entire structure of religious practice is built around this idea of satisfying a cosmic ego. It's not enough that He's all-powerful and perfect, He needs constant public adoration. How is that any different from the needy person who can't go 5 minutes without hearing how wonderful they are? Is that really the picture of divine perfection we've been sold? Now, let's tackle the big question. Why does God demand such strict, unwavering loyalty? This is where the control issues come into play. If God is truly omnipotent, why would He need to punish people for not following His rules exactly as He sees fit? If you don't pray the right way, if you don't believe in the correct version of God, the punishment isn't a slap on the wrist, it's eternal damnation. That's an extreme reaction, don't you think? That's not just divine justice. That's the behavior of someone with an enormous need for control and validation. You can almost hear God saying, "Love me, or else." And if you think about it, that's not love. That's not the kind of love you'd want in a partner, let alone in a creator. Love doesn't demand endless praise. Love doesn't punish you with eternal suffering if you don't obey perfectly. That's control. That's manipulation. And when you dig deeper, you realize that the entire system of worship, prayer, and obedience is structured around keeping God happy. It's less about us and more about keeping the ego of a cosmic being intact. So, here's the metaphor to really tie this all together. Imagine a small child with a toy that they refuse to share. They demand constant attention and validation, but they get upset if anyone else tries to play with the toy. They scream, they cry, they throw a tantrum. And the adults in the room, rather than helping the child learn how to share, give in to their demands. They cater to the child's emotional instability because they don't want to deal with the fallout. The child, in this case, is God. And the adults, well, that's us. We're the ones who build temples, sing songs, offer sacrifices, all to appease this cosmic child's ego. And if we don't, well, the tantrum is catastrophic. But instead of sitting down and teaching the child how to manage their emotions, we just give them more attention. This is the system we've created, a system where the behavior of a powerful being is dictated by emotional instability, insecurity, and a need for constant validation. It's not divine love, it's emotional manipulation on a cosmic scale. And it's a system that has been set up for millennia to make sure that the divine ego remains intact. It's not about us, it's about keeping God's self-esteem from crumbling. So, let's ask ourselves, if God is perfect, why does he need all of this? Why does he need the constant praise, the unyielding obedience, the fear of punishment? Why is there such an overwhelming demand for validation if he truly is the all-knowing, all-powerful being we've been taught to worship? Perhaps the truth is much more uncomfortable than we've been led to believe. Maybe God needs therapy more than we do. Let's take a step back and really examine how the system of religion, specifically the worship of God, functions, because when we peel back the layers, we start to see a pattern. The belief system isn't simply about spiritual salvation or personal growth, it's more about maintaining a constant, flattering interaction with a divine ego that craves validation. We've been conditioned to believe that we need God for moral guidance, for purpose, for hope. But in reality, it seems that God needs us just as much, if not more, to keep his cosmic self-esteem intact. First, let's break down the key components of this system: worship, obedience, and punishment. These three elements are tightly interwoven, like gears in a machine that's designed to keep us in line. Here's how it works. Every religion, no matter the tradition, involves some form of worship. Whether it's singing hymns, chanting mantras, making offerings, or attending services, the purpose is clear: to express gratitude and praise for God. On the surface, this may seem like a humble act of devotion, but when you look closer, you realize it's more like feeding an emotional beast. God's ego, we are led to believe, thrives on our constant adoration. Imagine, for a moment, that your friend, let's call him Bob, acts like this. Bob is a little insecure. He always asks you, "Do you think I'm a good person?" And when you answer, he needs to hear it again, and again, and again, not just in a casual, supportive way, but with intensity. If you don't tell him he's awesome all the time, he gets upset, he pulls away, or he starts making passive-aggressive comments. And if you stop complimenting him for a week, forget it, he's cutting you off. It's exhausting to be around him, right? But here's the twist. Bob doesn't just need validation for himself, he needs it from the world around him. He'll go out of his way to get attention, to make sure everyone sees how great he island. And if the world forgets to compliment him, he throws a tantrum. This is essentially the behavior attributed to God. We're not just praying to God for our own enlightenment or salvation, we're keeping his ego intact. When we pray, when we sing songs of praise, when we attend church, we're not just honoring God in some spiritual sense. No, we're feeding his need for constant recognition. The language of devotion and the rituals are constructed to make God feel validated. If he is truly omnipotent, why would he need our praise? It's not about us, it's about God's need to hear that he's amazing. If God is the creator of the universe, why can't he simply know his own greatness? Why the need for constant affirmation? Think of it this way. If God were truly perfect, like we've been told, he wouldn't need us to sing, chant, or kneel. He wouldn't require a choir of billions of voices to repeat, "Holy, holy, holy," every Sunday. The God we're presented with is more like an insecure superstar who demands attention from everyone in the room just to stay grounded. It's not divine holiness, it's emotional dependence on the worshippers. Next, we come to obedience, which plays a key role in the system of religious practice. This is the "we worship you because you're great, and we're so lucky to have you" dynamic. The problem is, this obedience is rarely voluntary. Instead, it's heavily enforced. God doesn't just ask for our devotion, He demands it. And if we don't comply, well, there are consequences. What's fascinating is that we've been trained to believe that these demands are signs of God's divine justice or wisdom. But when you strip away the divine justification, you see that they're more about control than about the pursuit of moral or spiritual growth. Let's imagine this system from a more personal standpoint. Think about your relationship with a boss at work. Let's say your boss is constantly reminding you of how lucky you are to work for them. You have to attend all their meetings, compliment their decisions, and praise their management skills every single day. If you skip a meeting or forget to tell them how amazing they are, there's a consequence. It might be a verbal warning, a reprimand, or even something more severe. Over time, you begin to feel like you have to participate in these rituals to avoid their wrath. This is precisely what God does. Obey me or else. If you don't pray enough, if you don't live your life the way He wants, you're punished. The wrath of God isn't just about moral correction. It's about making sure that the system works the way He wants it to. Whether it's eternal damnation or the plagues of Egypt, these punishments keep us in check, just like an overbearing boss. There's no space for genuine spiritual growth or exploration, only the pressure to conform and appease the controlling entity. Let's say you've never been the religious type, and you decide one day to step into church to explore your spirituality. You're not sure about the whole thing yet, but you're curious. But immediately you're told, if you don't believe in this way, you'll burn forever. If you don't worship in the right way, you'll never see paradise. Suddenly, you're trapped in a system that doesn't allow for questioning or individual exploration. It only demands obedience. And if you don't follow the script, you're out. It's not about your personal journey. It's about enforcing a rigid structure that requires absolute adherence. The idea that this is the will of a perfect being becomes questionable when we see how much control is being exerted. Now we come to the big one: punishment. According to most religious doctrines, God is not only the benevolent creator of the universe, but also the one who dispenses ultimate justice. And yet, when we examine the acts of justice in the Bible, for instance, they seem far from rational or measured. God's punishments often appear excessive, disproportionate, and fueled by emotional instability. Take the story of the flood, for example. After humans disobey God, He decides to wipe out every living creature except for Noah and his family. The destruction of the entire world seems like a drastic response, especially considering that God knew from the start that humans would fail. Why create humans with free will only to punish them for using it? Why allow them to make mistakes and then punish them eternally when they do? The flood is just one example. There's the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, where God rains down fire and brimstone because the people of the city are living immorally. Again, instead of offering a chance for repentance or peaceful correction, God chooses to destroy an entire city. If God were truly perfect, wouldn't He have a bit more patience? Wouldn't He offer some sort of opportunity for growth or change, rather than going straight to total annihilation? The logic doesn't add up. We could argue that God's actions are just, after all, He is all-powerful, right? But when you compare them to how we would handle similar situations in our own lives, we see the contradictions. When your friend or partner gets upset, you don't respond by destroying everything they've ever known. You talk it out, you express your frustration, you work through the issue. That's the emotionally intelligent way to handle conflict. But when it comes to God, there's no conversation. There's no, "Hey, maybe we can work this out." Instead, God goes straight to violence and eternal consequences. That's not divine justice, that's emotional instability on a cosmic scale. Let's be clear here. Punishment in this context isn't about learning or growth. It's about control. It's about enforcing a system that doesn't allow for questioning, failure, or deviation. In this system, the fear of punishment keeps us in check, just like a child who is constantly scared of upsetting an overbearing parent. But this parent isn't just a parent, he's a cosmic deity with the power to create worlds, yet still reacts like a petulant child when his demands aren't met. When we step back and look at this system of worship, obedience, and punishment, it becomes clear that it's less about divine love and more about control. God's actions seem less like the measured, loving guidance of a perfect being and more like the emotional outbursts of a being who can't handle rejection, disappointment, or disobedience. The need for constant praise, the extreme punishments for small infractions, the pressure for absolute conformity, it's all about maintaining God's ego, not about helping us grow spiritually. And yet, we've been taught to view it all as divine justice. But is it really? When we realize this, we begin to see that religion, in this context, is less a path to enlightenment and more a mechanism to keep us under control, constantly pleasing and appeasing a being that doesn't seem as emotionally stable as we've been led to believe. It's not about salvation. It's about feeding the ego of a cosmic entity that needs constant validation to stay balanced. The bottom line is this: we've been manipulated into thinking that this is the way it's supposed to be, that this is the only path to meaning and fulfillment. But when we break down the system and examine its contradictions, its emotional manipulation, and its demand for control, we see that the perfect, omnipotent God we've been taught to worship might not be as perfect as we've been led to believe. And maybe, just maybe, he needs a therapist more than we do. When we step back and look at the system that has been built around God, the expectations, the rituals, and the constant demands for adoration and obedience, it becomes evident that the image of God we've been handed is not one of pure, detached perfection. Instead, it's the picture of a being who needs constant validation, who throws tantrums when things don't go his way, and whose so-called love often feels more like a complex web of control and emotional instability. In many ways, we've been conditioned to believe in a version of God that fits a narrative of divine justice and wisdom, but when examined more closely, the picture that emerges is one of deep insecurity, jealousy, and a need for constant affirmation. It's crucial to recognize how we've been manipulated into accepting this flawed image. From an early age, we are taught that God is perfect, that his actions are justified by an omniscient, omnipotent wisdom that we, as mere humans, could never fully understand. And for the most part, we take it on faith, accepting these stories without questioning them because, after all, we've been told they're sacred, and questioning them seems almost heretical. But when we allow ourselves to look beyond the religious scripts and examine the inconsistencies, contradictions, and emotional underpinnings of this divine figure, we begin to see that we've been sold a version of perfection that is anything but perfect. What we've accepted as divine justice is, in many cases, an overreaction, a response to emotional needs rather than measured wisdom. The problem isn't just with God's actions, it's with the very structure we've built around him. Worship, obedience, punishment, these are not just religious practices, they're tools of control. They ensure that we stay in line, that we maintain our place in a system that constantly demands our attention, our praise, our submission. The rituals that are meant to bring us closer to God seem to do nothing more than feed his ego. And in doing so, we're left questioning, what is this all for? If God is perfect and all-knowing, why does he need us to remind him of his greatness? Why does he demand our constant adoration? And why, if we fail to meet his expectations, are we condemned? This system leaves us with a haunting question. If a perfect being truly existed, Would he really need such validation from his creations? Would he punish us so harshly for mistakes, for not perfectly reflecting his will? The very fact that God demands unending praise and threatens eternal damnation for failure indicates that something is fundamentally wrong with the nature of this divinity. If God were truly perfect, he would not need to assert his power over us, nor would he need our adulation to remind him of his perfection. A perfect being would be secure enough to exist without the constant need for reassurance. As we take this step back and reflect on the larger implications, we are faced with a more existential question. What does this tell us about our own nature? If we've created a deity who demands validation, who cannot bear the smallest of slights or disobedience, what does this say about the systems of belief that we cling to so desperately? Are we seeking to serve something greater than ourselves, or are we simply feeding a cosmic ego that demands our compliance? Are we being told to worship and obey a being that, at its core, may not be as perfect as we've been led to believe? Or are we, in truth, just trying to appease a being that is emotionally fragile and insecure? The implications of this are staggering because they suggest that we've built entire systems of belief around an illusion. This illusion of perfection has influenced everything from our moral compasses to our conceptions of right and wrong to our understanding of power and justice. If the image of God is flawed, if this being is just as emotionally troubled and needy as we are, then perhaps everything we've been taught to believe about perfection, about morality, and about love needs to be questioned. We live in a world that constantly pushes us toward the ideal: perfect love, perfect justice, perfect creation. But perhaps the reality is more complicated than that. Maybe perfection, as we understand it, doesn't exist. Maybe what we've been told is perfection is really a mask for deep insecurity, for a need to control, to dominate, and to be adored. And if that's the case, what does that mean for us? What does it mean for our relationships with one another, our own sense of self-worth, and our spiritual lives? As we reflect on these ideas, we begin to realize the magnitude of the questions at hand. We must ask ourselves, what does it truly mean to be perfect? Is perfection the absence of mistakes, the elimination of flaw, or is it something deeper, something more accepting, more balanced, more human? And what if we, too, have been striving for an unattainable ideal of perfection, only to find that it leads to frustration, self-doubt, and emotional exhaustion? Perhaps, in our search for God's perfection, we've missed the point entirely. The notion of a perfect being who demands perfection from us is a double-edged sword. It keeps us in line, yes, but it also keeps us trapped. We are conditioned to worship an ideal that might not even exist, an ideal that demands more than we can ever give and punishes us for being human. What would it look like to step away from this model, to release ourselves from the need to appease a divine ego, and instead embrace a reality where imperfection is not only accepted, but celebrated? Maybe the real power of spirituality doesn't lie in achieving some unattainable perfection, but in accepting our flaws, in learning how to live with them, and in recognizing that, just like God, we are all struggling to find meaning, connection, and validation in a vast, uncertain universe. Perhaps it's time to stop searching for perfection and start embracing the beautiful, messy reality of existence. In the end, we are left to ponder, if God is truly perfect, then why does he need so much from us? And if we are constantly striving to live up to this impossible ideal, what are we missing about ourselves and the world around us? It's these questions that challenge us to look deeper not only into the divine, but also into our own hearts, our own desires, and our own capacity for understanding. And in that search, perhaps we'll find the answers that have been hidden in plain sight all along. So, here we are, having spent all this time dissecting the image of God that's been handed down to us, and guess what? It turns out the perfect, all-knowing being we've been worshiping may not be so perfect after all. In fact, it seems like God might need a therapist more than the rest of us talk about a cosmic plot twist. Maybe the real reason the world hasn't ended yet isn't because of divine grace, but because God's been too busy managing his own insecurities to hit the self-destruct button. You have to wonder, if God is truly all-powerful, why does he need so much praise, so much attention, so much constant reassurance? It's almost like we've been cast in the universe's longest, most expensive therapy session, and the only person who doesn't realize it is the one in charge. It's funny how we've spent millennia telling ourselves that we need to worship this deity for his benefit, when in reality, it might be us who are doing all the emotional heavy lifting. Now, don't get me wrong, religion and faith can be beautiful, powerful things. But maybe it's time we start questioning why we've built such elaborate systems to feed the ego of a being that supposedly doesn't even need feeding. What's the real cost of all this adoration and obedience? Why do we keep going through the motions, repeating the same prayers, performing the same rituals, just to avoid upsetting a being who seems emotionally unpredictable at best?